Washington, D.C. Reminder, when you hear this, to tune in to C-SPAN, Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network, Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be the From K. Tarpley debate on false flag terrorism and some of the biggest exposure for 9/11 truth. And a very good time, as we are now on the darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of war, and that is in particular Syria, and to add to that, to add to the urgency, the question then of France, right? The French elections and what happened there. So, just to wrap up Syria, we're looking at Russia, we're looking at China. Certainly these powers must know that if they do not hang tough, if they do not block the Security Council on an aggression resolution, then they will begin to lose all of their allies. They will then be swept into absolute isolation, and they will lose the goodwill of significant areas of public opinion in the United States and Western Europe, who are giving Russia and China very much of a second look, and to a significant degree, revaluing them as actual forces for peace, forces that need to be helped in this task of trying to introduce some kind of balance into the world. So I hope that has been understood. Today happens to be the 26th of April, the last press conference by Medvedev. So the Medvedev era is now rapidly coming to an end, and it couldn't happen fast enough. Not a moment too soon. The disaster of Medvedev, the disaster of appeasement policy, the attempt to appease Anglo-American imperialism under the rubric of the so-called reset, has been a catastrophe. Ask the people in Libya. Ask the people then in a broad belt of countries across the Sahara, Sub-Sahara. Ask the countries that are now on the line. Ask people in Syria and elsewhere. The treachery of Medvedev, there is no other word, denounced by his own ambassador, Ambassador Chamov, a man of character in Libya, that this was a betrayal of Russian interests when Medvedev refused to block the aggression in the Security Council. So we won't be hearing about him anymore, and his devotion to Silicon Valley and his fawning on Obama with hamburger diplomacy. He tried the hamburger diplomacy, and within 24 to 48 hours, the Anglo-Americans responded with the Anna Chapman spy story, right, which they could have pulled out at any time, but they decided to do it then. That was the first sort of normal summit between the U.S. and the Russians in the memory of man, and to make sure that that didn't go anywhere, the Anna Chapman story was dragged out. So goodbye, Medvedev. Putin, I hope, is going to bring a clear change. We've also got the U.S. gearing up, right? If you were listening to National Public Radio this morning, Diane Rehm, she had not only Madeleine Albright, the butcher of Iraq in the 1990s, killing 1 million to 1.5 million children, sick, elderly, with her economic sanctions, including food, right? Remember that the oil for food came as a softening of the previous regime, which was essentially no food and therefore genocide. We've also got Bruce Riedel. I think he's a former CIA official. This tells us what we need to know about him. Bruce Riedel, close to the CIA, expressing the views of the CIA, essentially gearing up for the action that people are now expecting on Syria. Quite a few callers, though, to Diane Rehm attacking the imperialist gangsters that were on there. Notice today also Charles Taylor of Liberia convicted by the kangaroo court, right? Whatever the merits or demerits of Charles Taylor, he was convicted by the Ocampo kangaroo court in The Hague, and so Taylor, at most, whatever his crimes are, Madeleine Albright, a wholesaler of genocide, she's going to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Madeleine Albright gets the Presidential Medal of Freedom for genocide. Charles Taylor, because he's a black African, under the Ocampo racist kangaroo court, Charles Taylor gets to be convicted. So there we go with that. So Juppé, let's just hear Juppé before we wrap this up. We cannot allow ourselves to be defined by the current regime, says Alain Juppé. This is a nice way to say regime change. How about that? And there's going to be a report on May 5th by Kofi Annan on the state of the ceasefire. Well, we do not trust Kofi Annan for 1 second. He is an imperialist operative. He's a functionary, a hack of the defunct British Empire. It lives on in him. He was an enabler of war and genocide when he was Secretary General. Why should he be anything else? And this Ban Ki-moon now is a step down, if anything. But that's the tradition of these puppet heads of the Secretariat at the United Nations. So the French are now saying that they want to get going with an attack right in time. Well, right in time for the second round of the elections. According to one source, the report from Kofi Annan will be highly politicized, but with a number of UN Security Council members keen to use it as an excuse for war, it is virtually a foregone conclusion that the report will be phrased vaguely enough to allow such a report to proceed. Well, time to get those vetoes ready, right? Those pencils, the veto pencils you hold up. U.S. and NATO hostility to this ceasefire, tremendous. All right, let's now look at this very interesting sample of the current world that we have in the form of the French elections. Now, remember, we've talked in the past, Sarkozy is the most pro-NATO president of France. Sarkozy grew up in a CIA household. His stepfather, I think, if that's the technical term, his stepfather was from the Wisner family, and it was that Wisner, Frank, I think, but anyway, Wisner, the same guy that was sent by Obama to Mubarak last year to tell Mubarak to quit, was Wisner, the stepfather of Sarkozy. So Sarkozy grows up in a CIA household, and this tells us everything we need to know about him. He is a NATO president of France. How did Sarkozy get to this point? Well, we're not going to go all the way back to various dirty intelligence operations against Dominique de Villepin. We have one to report that's more current. But let's do an in-depth look at the French elections, bearing in mind that this puts us on a very high state of alert for a wag the dog false flag event between now and May 6th. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We want to remind you once again on C-SPAN, Saturday, April 28th at 8 p.m. on C-SPAN Book TV. I guess that's C-SPAN 2. C-SPAN 2 Book TV. The From, Kay, and Tarpley debate on Black Ops false flags, and we'll see the immediate relevance of this. Let's look now at the French elections. Sarkozy got where he was because of intelligence operations. Every step of Sarkozy's rise to power has been assisted by Anglo-American and also Israeli intelligence operations in his favor. One was that Villepin was accused of having slandered Sarkozy, and Villepin had to go to court, was dragged into court and stand trial as a result of this. Later he got off, but this is the way it was done. The reason that Sarkozy did as well as he did was that the stronger candidate, at least in terms of French public opinion, for whatever that's worth, Dominique Strauss-Kahn was knocked out by a CIA entrapment operation run through the New York City Police Department. Couldn't be more obvious, could it? And then at the beginning of the election period, we had the Toulouse patsy Mohammed Merah, a patsy who had been sheep-dipped by the DGSE, the French CIA equivalent, and the DCRI, the French domestic FBI equivalent, sheep-dipped in 12 countries: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and above all, Israel. Just amazing, this patsy. So somebody goes on a murder spree. This guy is blamed. They make sure to kill him, whatever they told him. He'll never testify. And that gave Sarkozy a certain bump. But now the bump didn't work. So in the first round of the French elections last Sunday, we have Sarkozy coming in second with a little bit over 27% of the vote, about a little bit less than 10 million votes. The problem was that the Socialist Party, François Hollande, got more than 10 million votes. He beat Sarkozy by about 500,000 votes, or about 1.5% of the vote. Now, Hollande, of course, represents the Second International, and we know the Second or Socialist International and the French Socialist Party in particular, having been perverted by François Mitterrand, by Lionel Jospin, and by others. This Socialist Party is a worthless political operation, and it's also the CIA, Soros, people like this run wild in the Second International. However, given the odious character of Sarkozy, the French Socialist Party became a pole of attraction for anti-Sarkozy forces. And when you have someone so close to absolute evil as Sarkozy, despite certain demagogic things that he's done, I mean, he's supported things that are actually quite good, but he does this within a framework of camouflaging himself in pure opportunism. Hollande has now become a pole of attraction for forces that are abreacting against the absolute or almost absolute evil represented by Sarkozy. So this means that the imperative is indeed to get Sarkozy out. I think that's quite clear. Hollande will present problems of his own. But this is the way it then went. Sarkozy gets 27.2%. Hollande gets 28.6%. Then we get Marine Le Pen, and this is the National Front. Now, this group had been founded essentially by her father. Le Pen the Elder is a racist in the tradition of Vichy. He's basically it's what's left over of the fascism of Pétain and Laval and the Vichy government. And it's mainly xenophobic, right? It's directed against foreigners, above all against Muslim foreigners, against Arabs. However, with Marine Le Pen, since she took over at the beginning of last year, she has tried to expand the appeal of this party. So she downplays the sort of neo-fascist rhetoric that you heard from her father, the Le Pen the Elder. But Marine, in addition to being a woman, right, benefiting from that when most of the other leaders are male, Marine Le Pen says, I am here to protect you. I'm here to protect you against globalization in the form of people coming across the borders, and I am here to protect you against globalization in the form of economic attacks, unfair competition, the euro, the European Commission, and so forth. So she's got an element of racism and chauvinism and xenophobia, which remains the glue for the hardcore cadre of her organization. But then she's also got this other thing, which is anti-globalization. So she's in favor of statism to protect you. Yes, indeed. Any fool can see that, right? Anybody but that kind of terminal mental disease known as U.S. libertarianism, right, out on the right wing of the Republican Party, can see that if you want to protect yourself against globalization and multinational corporations and big banks, then the power of the state must be mobilized in that regard. So Marine Le Pen added that element, saying, I'm in favor of reforms, but legal controls to prevent you from being ripped off by economic actors outside of government. Okay, so with that, she gained, 3, 4, 5% on top of what her father once got. Her father once got through to the second round when the Jospin candidacy in 2002 was so pathetic. So she got, 6.5 million votes, 18% of the votes. And then we get Mélenchon. Mélenchon is what's left of the PCF, the French Communist Party, plus other leftists. And this did relatively well, although not as well as expected. Almost 4 million votes, more than 11%. Then we get a group called the centrists, right? This is called Democratic Movement, Mouvement Démocratique. François Bayrou, Bayrou. Now, this is an interesting group because this seems to be the biggest shift of voters in the entire election is at the expense of this guy, Bayrou. He's a centrist, right? We have all these people here in the U.S. saying, oh, we've got to have centrism, we got to have moderation, we got to meet in the middle. Well, this is a party that wanted to meet in the middle, and it lost 10%. So the last election, Bayrou came in with 20% of the vote, this time with 9%. 10% of the voters have gone elsewhere. Some of them have gone to Mélenchon, some of them have gone to Le Pen, some of them have gone to Hollande, but they have departed Bayrou. So he has been worse than cut in half. What was his line? Austerity, debt, balance the budget, take, the sacrifice now to balance the budget, fiscal responsibility, and all this garbage. And the French, with their good sense, and congratulations to them, have said, no, this interests us not a bit. Then we have Eva Joly, quixotic candidacy of the Green Party, very nice lady. I met her in Iceland a couple of years ago. Then we have minor parties, Dupont-Aignan, sort of a dissident person from the Sarkozy party. Poutou is this is the front, the new anti-capitalist party, Poutou being a worker. That's interesting. Then Nathalie Arthaud has taken the place of Arlette Laguillière of Lutte Ouvrière, worker struggle. And then last is Cheminade of Solidarité et Progrès, the LaRouche candidate. We'll tell you a little bit more about this and how the one who came last, Cheminade, did the greatest service to Sarkozy, kept him alive into the second round, I think. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, this coming Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN 2 Book TV, there will be the debate of David Frum, neocon from the Bush White House, Jonathan Kay, Canadian neocon from the National Post, and yours truly, Tarpley, on black ops, false flags, 9/11. Very timely, given the push by NATO to attack Syria and the push by Sarkozy, or Sarkozy's backers and controllers, to keep him in power. Now, when we go through this list, Hollande, Sarkozy, Le Pen, you can see some of the names that aren't there are the most interesting ones. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, knocked out by a CIA op in New York City. But how about Dominique de Villepin? I venture to say the only man of character in this entire group, the only authentic Gaullist, the only person who showed any connection to the grand tradition of General de Gaulle of France, right? The notion of independence, progress, and peace that de Gaulle talked about. That was Dominique de Villepin, and he showed real personal courage, standing up to the gangster Colin Powell and the State Department and that entire crew, whatever they claim now. Oh, they didn't really mean it. Well, too bad. But de Villepin was able to stand up to them in the early part of 2003 in the UN Security Council, right? The CIA hates de Villepin with a passion, and the State Department also. The little Ribbentrops of Foggy Bottom hate Dominique de Villepin. Now, how come he didn't get on the list? He couldn't get the signatures. He fell 25 or 30 signatures short of the 500 mayors you have to get to sign for you and to get you on the ballot. That's how you get on the ballot. So here's a guy who was former foreign minister of France, former prime minister of France, and still couldn't get the signatures. Now, how did that happen? And then we look at Cheminade, right? This was the big surprise, was that Cheminade came up with more than 500. I think the last announcement from Cheminade is something like 589. I'm not sure of that number, but he got over 500, that's for sure. And they were validated signatures. Is there any way in which the 500 for Cheminade hang together with the fewer than 500 for de Villepin? I think it is. I think there is, in the sense that Cheminade this time around was billing himself as a left Gaullist. Well, a left Gaullist is what de Villepin really represented, in the sense of if Sarkozy is Gaullism, then de Villepin, both on foreign policy and on domestic, is to the left of Sarkozy, right, in real terms. That de Villepin was more like solidarity, right, not so much extreme free market. At least this was the general tendency. So Cheminade marketed himself as a left Gaullist and seemed to have got there first for some of these mayors that otherwise might have signed for a real left Gaullist in the person of de Villepin. And what would this have looked like if Villepin had gotten through and gotten on the ballot? Well, the person whose vote total would have suffered the most is Sarkozy himself. Sarkozy got 27.18% of the vote. Let's say Villepin could have gotten 4% or 5% just by being there and by being a prime minister and a foreign minister with a track record of character and standing up to the universal bullies. He would have gotten somewhere. In the debates, there were no direct debates. There now will be, but in the equal time that Villepin would have gotten, would he not have been able to put out significant things about Sarkozy? Could that not have translated into a drop of 6, 7, 8% for Sarkozy? And you see what you're getting at. It would have been possible to eliminate Sarkozy in the first round. In the last days before the first round this time, it seemed to me that there was a remote possibility of having Sarkozy as an incumbent president of France knocked out on the first round, eliminated from competition, that was coming in third or worse. That was possible. It didn't happen. And the way it would have been possible if de Villepin had been there. And I'm afraid when you look at the Cheminade candidacy, we have to conclude that the difference between de Villepin getting on the ballot and either knocking Sarkozy out of the box on the first round completely or weakening him in a stunning way so that he would now be doomed to succumb in the second round. The difference was Cheminade with his 500-plus signatures. And that, I think, shows you how certain political organizations can be used as tools, whether they know it or not, whether they're capable of understanding this or not. And we've also talked about the idiocy of Cheminade when we talked about Mera, right? Mera, a consummate patsy, sheep-dipped in a dozen countries. And Cheminade insists on going around talking about the importance of video games. So, what we see here now, France is adrift on the ocean of adventures, as de Gaulle once said, after Dominique Strauss-Kahn knocked out Mohamed Merah, de Villepin knocked out. What's the next step on the ocean of adventures? Will it be a false flag event? Well, Juppé is calling for war. We've just had 70 people killed in a huge bomb in Syria. Is that going to be the direction? A wag the dog. Sarkozy says, or Sarkozy's controllers and backers, as the case may be, says, look, right now we're going to lose. We've got to do something big. We've got to call a general mobilization. We've got to have some huge event, maybe an event inside France, to be blamed on Syria. Sarkozy, this morning, his mood is he wants basically a stand-your-ground law for cops. He's so enamored of what happened here in Florida with Trayvon Martin. He loves Alec, I suppose, the Koch brothers. He wants the French equivalent of stand your ground for the French police. Remember, this is the guy who got elected president based on his his deplorable tenure as interior minister, when he talked about la racaille, the rascals, right, the human trash of the suburbs, the working class and significantly Arab or Muslim suburbs of Paris. So this is the horror of Sarkozy. Notice the Weimarization, in particular with Bayrou, right? The collapse of the bourgeois center. That's Bayrou. And that has collapsed. That has been the biggest single movement of votes. 10% have fled from the bourgeois center, and its Bruning-like policy of pay the debt and austerity and sacrifice. This is why the London Economist gave its cover to the famous French painting, the Lunch on the Grass, right? Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, with a nude woman sitting together with Sarkozy and Hollande. The French don't want austerity. And indeed, let's take a quick look. Of the candidates who are anti-austerity, we can say Hollande is anti-austerity. Hollande says, at least verbally, right? That's all we can go by. That's what the voters go by. Hollande says the European Central Bank should do more for growth, not so much austerity. Marine Le Pen, as we said, is strongly anti-austerity. She says, we're here to protect you from the depredations of these international corporations. Mélenchon wants a tax of 100% on the ill-gotten swag of the fat cats in the upper income brackets. Hollande, I think, wants 75% tax of incomes over 500,000 euros. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Eva Joly, I think, anti-austerity. Well, you can see them. The ones who are anti-austerity win, and the pro-austerity candidates, that would be Sarkozy, he can't get away from what he's done, and Bayrou, they lose. Eat your heart out, Ron Paul. The extreme austerity party is the big loser of the French election, right? And in France, everybody knows that austerity comes from the International Monetary Fund and the hated banks of London and New York. And Americans, I'm afraid, are too dumb to see, because the element of class consciousness is so sadly lacking. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's our edition one day early for the 26th of April, and we want to remind you to watch C-SPAN 2. C-SPAN 2 on Saturday, April 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Saturday, April 28th Eastern Time, this coming Saturday. The Battle of the Books, 9/11, False Flag, Black Ops, Jonathan Kay, David Frum, Webster Tarpley debating all of these things. Very timely because, of course, we're living right now under the shadow of a false flag event, a new wag the dog concerning Syria. This would also suit the backers of Sarkozy in France. And whenever there's one of these events, look to the former colonial power. The former colonial power often has the networks to be able to do something on the ground if it's a question of doing something in Syria or of doing something in France and blaming it on Syria. The former colonial power is in the best situation for that. Now, we're going to talk about a number of things here in the second part of the program. We're going to talk about the Secret Service in particular, as well as China, once again. But we want to talk about the forgotten men, the forgotten people, the 50 to 60 million Americans who are living in extreme poverty, living on food stamps, 1 in 7 on food stamps again this week. And we want to talk about the question of the student loans, and should the interest rate on student loans go up? Well, the answer to that is obviously no, but let's frame this discussion. And in order to do it, we want to remind you that education is your right. Healthcare is a right. Americans have economic rights. All people have economic rights. These rights are rooted in natural law, and they are not recognized in the U.S. Constitution. They should be. We have political and religious rights in the U.S. Constitution. We want our economic and social rights, too. And the most important statement of this important thesis comes from Franklin D. Roosevelt himself, the Economic Bill of Rights from the State of the Union address of January 1944. And let's just listen to Roosevelt as he develops these 8 rights that he wants to enact after World War II, you're hearing why he had to die, why Roosevelt had to be assassinated in April of 1945 to prevent these changes from being made in the U.S. Constitution, which would have anchored these rights in the Constitution. This is why the finance oligarchs wanted to get rid of him, and it goes from there. And notice he warns against the danger of fascism in the wake of a failure to enact these rights. So let's listen to a fireside chat version of the Economic Bill of Rights from 1944.
It is our duty now to begin to lay the plans and determine the strategy for more than the winning of the war. It is time to begin the plans and determine the strategy for winning a lasting peace and the establishment of an American standard of living higher than ever known before. This republic had its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable political rights, among them the right of free speech, free press, free worship, trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. They were our rights to life and liberty. We have come to a clearer realization of the fact, however, that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry, people who are out of a job, are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. In our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries, or shops, or farms, or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of farmers to raise and sell their products at a return which will give them and their families a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age and sickness and accident and unemployment. Finally, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part upon how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice for all our citizens. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world. One of the great American industrialists of our day, a man who has rendered yeoman service to his country in this crisis, recently emphasized the grave dangers of rightist reaction in this nation. All clear-thinking businessmen share that concern. Indeed, if such reaction should develop, if history were to repeat itself, and we were to return to the so-called normalcy of the 1920s, then it is certain that even though we shall have conquered our enemies on the battlefields abroad, we shall have yielded to the spirit of fascism here at home. I ask the Congress to explore the means for implementing this economic Bill of Rights, for it is definitely the responsibility of the Congress so to do, and the country knows it. Many of these problems are already before committees of the Congress in the form of proposed legislation. I shall from time to time communicate with the Congress with respect to these and further proposals. In the event that no adequate program of progress is evolved, I am certain that the nation will be conscious of the fact.
And that was Roosevelt in 1944, and you heard those points, right? The basis of a lasting peace is that the United States must attain a standard of living higher than ever before. You have economic rights. These must be constitutionally recognized and anchored. You have the right to a job, to an adequate income, to a decent home, to medical care, to protection against old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. Specifically for farmers, you should not be subjected to monopoly competition. You must get a decent return. I think this is another way of saying parity prices or parity plus, 100% parity plus, whatever it takes. And if you're a businessman, you have to be free from the competition of monopolies, of cartels, of Walmart, and others. This also would include a measure of protectionism for the entire country, so that you're not competing with sweatshops, the sweatshops of the rest of the world, of low-wage, low-income countries. And, of course, the thrust of the libertarian is that everybody's got to be dragged down to the lowest level of the runaway shop in Mississippi. And as Roosevelt says, if you don't get this, you might get rightist reaction, you might get fascism. So let's now use that as a framework to talk about student loans, food stamps, and a couple of other things. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, on Saturday, April 28th at 8 p.m. on C-SPAN, you can see the broadcast version of the debate on 9/11 false flags, black ops, with Jonathan Kay, David Frum, and yours truly, Webster Tarpley. Very timely because of the danger of a wag-the-dog false flag attack combining the principal NATO stooge in Western Europe, Sarkozy, in big trouble, and the desire of the Anglo-American elites, the finance oligarchs, to attack Syria. So tune in. Now, we just went through FDR's Economic Bill of Rights. You have economic rights. Some reactionary Republican cockroach comes along, even one who says he's a libertarian, and says you don't have a right to health care. Say, sorry, pal, we're Americans, we're human beings, we have the right to these things. The lasting peace, based on a standard of living higher than ever before. The right to a job, income, decent home, medical care, protection against old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, freedom from monopoly competition for farmers and for other businessmen. Now, of course, what is a right? The right simply means it's not just a commodity that you get or don't get depending on how well you're doing, and it's not a privilege that some people get because of their heredity or where they were born or their family, but it's a right. Now, the right to free speech is a good example. Free speech is a right. It doesn't mean somebody does it for you. It means you have to do it yourself, but you cannot be prevented, and the society has got to be organized in ways that foster the exercise of these rights. So the standing of the United States in the world depends on the degree to which we can realize these 8 rights, right? Job, income, home, medical, various kinds of social insurance, education, and that makes 6, and then the farmer and the businessman gets us up to 8. People have a right to security. You notice libertarians, right? Be it Irving Kristol once said, it's disgusting that U.S. politics turns on a prescription drug benefit. Ron Paul, quoting Nietzsche or quoting Ayn Rand, I suppose, mocks the idea of people wanting security. You shouldn't want security. So there's, of course, a millionaire who's got plenty of security. And the goal of this, human happiness and well-being. There is a humanistic purpose in this entire thing. So Let's now apply this. We've had this, I think, absolutely insane discussion about the interest rates on student loans. The situation right now is bad enough. $1 trillion of student loans crush the younger generation of America. Last week we went through how younger people are prevented from marrying, prevented from buying homes, prevented from renting homes, prevented from having children by the crush of this educational expense. Now, what's actually going on here? The manpower for the corporations is being trained, and the people are expected to pay for it. Well, class consciousness says, no, the corporation that benefits from this labor power, they've got to participate. They've got to take over a significant, a heavy-duty part of the cost, and that will be done through taxation. Leading the charge is, of course, the Wall Street sales tax, so that we have to go to a situation where Roosevelt could say in 1944, you have a right to education, and now, almost 70 years later, we're told, no. We just had a Republican interviewed by Chuck Todd on MSNBC, a Republican demagogue from Florida, who said people in Florida don't care about the interest rate on student loans. They just care about their home and a job. And the reporter, astounded, said, you mean they don't care about a college education for their children? No, a home and a job. These desperate Republican gangster demagogues have actually been put into a very interesting situation by this student loan question. The problem is, of course, what are the Democrats offering? The Democrats are offering 3.4% on $1 trillion of illegitimate loans, and the Republicans are demanding 6.8% be paid in. The Republicans would actually like to go back to the situation where the zombie bankers were skimming off this significantly. Now, I want to thank Glenn Ford of the Black Agenda Report, so often functioning as the conscience of the United States. Always take a look at Glenn Ford at the Black Agenda Report. He called attention to the question of Finland and how this had been discussed in the Washington Post. Now, Finland is, of course, a country, small country, not a military power, no huge deposits of oil or other high-value natural resources. They do have some things, but not anything that would let them live like Saudi Arabia. So in Finland, the human condition is posed in a very direct and interesting way. That economic value depends on the level of qualification, education, competence of your labor force. That your labor force is your wealth. It's not gold. Gold is not your wealth. Ask Midas, right? The Midas touch, of course, the curse of Midas, when everything turned to gold around him, is a metaphor for this. It's the labor power, human capital, mental capital, the degree of education, qualification, preparation of your labor force is where economic value is found. Now, in Finland, they can see that because they're not going to be able to conquer somebody and loot them. They're not going to be able to sit back and clip coupons. They're not going to be able to mine it out of the ground, right? They don't have a gold mine or something like this. So the problem of fetishism and alienation that we see with these money obsessions or gold obsessions in other parts of the world is less acutely posed in Finland. So this is now a learning society. The learning society says, in effect, that the future of the country depends on maximizing mental capital, human capital, and the qualified, prepared, highly skilled, scientifically trained workforce. And people notice this. And the question is, we have these PISA standards, right? The international rankings of the different countries, Program for International Student Assessment, right? U.S. doing increasingly poorly on this, Finland doing extremely well. And how do they do it? Well, bear in mind what Roosevelt wanted, and you'll see that this is now borne out many times in economic reality, but now by Finland. How about the funding of schools in Finland? It's based on a formula that allows equal allocation of resources to every school, regardless of where it is or how rich the place is. So in this case, you're not going to have these wild variations from a slum school or a rural Appalachian or other poor rural school to some area, zip code with lots of fat cats. The well-being of children, if the kid is in a poverty-stricken household and comes to school hungry, this won't work, no matter how good the teacher is. All children in Finland have, by law, access to child care, comprehensive health care, and preschool. And they have means of tracking this in the school. Child care, health care, and a preschool. Well, you can kiss that goodbye. We don't have it. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.